A single point of light streaks across the night sky, falling towards the Eldar tribe's most sacred ground. Elara, a young elf who has always felt the stars were whispering just for her, watches it descend, her heart pounding in rhythm with the ancient forest around her. The elders have always forbidden anyone from approaching the grove after dark, warning of dire consequences. But tonight, a compulsion stronger than fear pulls her forward. She knows, with a certainty that shakes her very soul, that this dying star carries a message for her people. By the end of this tale, you will uncover the celestial origins of the Eldar tribes and the forgotten pact that once bound elves to the heavens. What secret could be so vital that the stars themselves would send a messenger, and what price will Elara pay for listening? Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it where you are? The whispers of the trees seem to guide her steps as she runs, leaving the safety of the village behind, racing toward a truth that could either save her people or shatter their world forever. The ground still smoldered beneath her feet. In the center of the small crater lay the star Fragment, no larger than her palm, its surface a swirling map of captured nebulae and soft, internal fire. It pulsed, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to echo the frantic beating in her own chest. The Elder's warnings were a distant roar in her memory, utterly silenced by the artifact's silent song. Without a thought for the consequences, Elara reached out, her fingers brushing against its impossible warmth. Instantly, the world vanished. A torrent of light and knowledge flooded her mind. She saw constellations being born, great patterns of stars shifting like pieces on a cosmic board. She felt the cold, vast silence between them, and then a warmth, a presence. She saw her own people, not as they were now, but as luminous beings stepping onto the world for the first time, guided by these same celestial lights. A pact was made, a promise whispered on solar winds, a bond of guidance and protection, now frayed and all but forgotten. The history of the Eldar was written in Starlight, and it was a story her tribe had lost. The vision shattered as a voice, sharp as flint, cut through the grove. Elara, you have trespassed. The elders stood at the crater's edge, their faces carved from stone and shadow. Their leader, Kaelin, pointed a trembling finger. You defy our most sacred law. Abandon that thing. Step away now, and perhaps the forest will forgive your transgression. But the star Fragment's glow had seeped into her skin. Its gentle pulse was now a steady drumbeat, synced with her own heart, a tangible thread connecting her to the heavens. To let go now would be to tear out a part of her own soul. The elders demanded obedience, the safety of tradition. The stars offered a forgotten truth, a destiny she could no longer ignore. The choice was a chasm opening at her feet. Would she return to the familiar shadows of the village, or answer the call echoing from the void, a call that now beat within her very blood? The stone circle of the council felt colder than the heart of winter. Elara stood in the center, the elders a grim, silent circle around her. Kael's voice was the first to break the silence, low and heavy with disappointment. You have broken a law older than the oldest tree, he said. You brought an unknown power into our most sacred space. It is an omen of ruin, but Elara's voice did not waver. She held the star Fragment close, its warmth a small, defiant sun against her chest. It is not an omen, she insisted. "It is a voice. The stars are not attacking us. They are trying to speak, and we have forgotten how to listen." The other elders murmured, their faces a mixture of fear and anger. One argued that the old ways exist for a reason, to protect them from the dangers of the unknown. Another spoke of ancient tales where pride led to a tribe's downfall. They saw only a dangerous, forbidden object, but Elara saw a key. She saw the map of the cosmos in its heart, the history of her people written in light. The debate raged around her, a storm of tradition against a single spark of truth. Kale finally raised a hand, silencing the circle. His judgment was absolute. "The fragment will be sealed away in the mountain vaults," he declared. "Its light will be forgotten, and this transgression will be spoken of no more. The safety of the tribe is all that matters." Elara bowed her head, not in submission, but to hide the fire in her eyes. As the elders filed out, she made a silent vow. She would not let their fear bury this truth. If the tribe would not listen, she would find someone who would. Perhaps the answers lay not in their guarded forest, but in the wider world, in places her people had long forgotten. Her defiance was no longer just about a stone. It was about the very soul of the Eldar, and her path was now clear. She would follow the Starlight, no matter where it led. The mountain path was a ribbon of shadow under a sky dense with unfamiliar stars. Elara climbed, not toward the village, but away from it, her steps guided by a single, desperate hope. The elders spoke of a hermit, a woman named Lyra, who had once been a lore keeper before she chose exile over the tribe's rigid traditions. They called her mad, but Elara needed the wisdom they had cast aside. She found Lyra in a cave where the walls glittered with embedded quartz, mimicking the constellations above. The old elf did not seem surprised to see her. Her eyes, pale and deep as a winter sky, went straight to the star fragment, glowing softly in Elara's hand. "You carry a question that has haunted our people for generations," Lyra said, her voice a soft rustle of dry leaves. "And the heavens have sent you an answer." She beckoned Elara inside, to a space where charcoal drawings of celestial patterns covered the smooth stone. Lyra spoke of a time before fear, an age of alliance. The stars were not distant, cold fires, she explained. They were sentinels, guides. Our ancestors walked with them, learning the rhythms of the cosmos and the secrets of the world's first dawn. The falling star was no random event. It is a summons, a call from beings who have watched over us since the beginning, and who now sense a great silence from our tribe. They fear we are lost. From a hidden crevice, Lyra produced a roll of aged leather. Unfurled, it revealed a star map, but unlike any used for navigation. "This does not chart mountains or rivers," Lyra whispered, tracing the lines with a trembling finger. "It charts fate. It shows the points of convergence, the places where the veil between our world and the celestial realm is thinnest. But you cannot read this map alone. Its true meaning is locked away, scattered." Lyra's gaze was grave. "The star touch is a rare gift, but you are not the only one. Others, in tribes far from this forest, have also felt the pull. Outcasts, seekers, those who hear the old songs on the wind. You must find them. Only together can you hope to understand the summons and reforge the pact. The journey will be perilous. The path is not just across land, but into the heart of a mystery your own people have tried to bury. Elara stared at the map, its lines a labyrinth, leading to a future she could barely comprehend. Her quest was no longer a solitary rebellion. It was a pilgrimage, and her first step was to find strangers who shared her impossible connection to the sky. The Whispering Peaks felt like a world away, a destination for a dreamer or a fool. Elara's first test came not from the wilderness, but from a cynical hunter from the Riverstone tribe. Finn found her at the edge of the marshlands, his bow slung over a shoulder and a skeptical grin on his face. "You are the one they are whispering about," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "The elf who talks to rocks from the sky. Our elders say you will bring a storm down on all of us." He saw no sacred mission in her eyes, only a dangerous delusion. Elara clutched the fragment, its warmth a small comfort against his derision. She tried to explain the map, the summons, the forgotten pact, but he only laughed. "Stories for children," he countered. "The sky is empty. We have enough trouble here on the ground without inventing more." Their argument was cut short as dusk fell. As the constellation of the Sentinel, a pattern Finn's own people used to mark the harvest, crested the horizon, the star fragment in Elara's hand flared. A beam of pure, silvery light shot from its core, not toward the constellation itself, but to a single, brilliant star at its heart, a star his tribe's stories called the Ancestors' Tear. Finn stumbled back, all mockery gone, replaced by a stunned silence. The light felt familiar, a forgotten lullaby humming in his bones. He looked from the heavens to the glowing stone, and the foundation of his world shifted. "My grandmother," he whispered, his voice rough with awe. "She had a tale, she said our line was born under that star. We thought it was just a story. The star fragment had not just shown him a light. It had shown him a reflection of his own hidden history. His practicality warred with this impossible proof, but the truth was now etched in light across his vision. He had no choice but to follow it. Their journey toward the peaks began as a tense alliance. He trusted the terrain, she trusted the stars. He saw a perilous climb, she saw a celestial altar. One evening, as they studied the leather map by firelight, their conflicting views collided. Finn pointed to a series of jagged lines. "This is a pass through the Serpent's Tooth Ridge. It is the safest path." Elara shook her head, her finger tracing a different, seemingly illogical route that curved around the mountain's base. "The map is not of stone and soil, Finn. It is of light. This symbol aligns with the Weaver's constellation. We must go this way." He called it a reckless gamble. She called it faith. It was their first true test, a battle between the knowledge of the earth and the whispers of the sky. With a frustrated sigh, Finn finally relented. "I will follow your star path, but if it leads us off a cliff, do not expect me to be surprised." Their mutual distrust was a third companion on the trail, silent and heavy. Yet as they took the first steps on the starlit route, both felt the same unspoken tension. The wilds were watching, and the mountains ahead seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see if a hunter and a dreamer could learn to trust each other before the ancient dangers of the path consumed them both. The path up the Whispering Peaks was a test of crumbling faith and fragile stone. One moment, Finn was pointing out a stable-looking ledge. The next, it was tumbling into the abyss with a roar that swallowed Elara's gasp. He moved with a hunter's instinct, his body reading the mountain's muscle and bone, pulling her back from a fissure that opened like a hungry mouth. She, in turn, guided their steps not by the visible trail, but by the subtle pull of the star fragment, its warmth flaring in warning when the earth itself was about to betray them. Their survival became a desperate, unspoken dance. His knowledge of the ground and her connection to the sky, their only shields against the mountain's indifference. When they finally hauled themselves onto the windswept summit, their hands were raw, their trust no longer a theory, but a hard-won truth forged in shared peril. The peak was a knife's edge of granite, and at its center stood a circle of ancient, worn stones. In the middle sat an altar, its surface carved with symbols that mirrored the constellations on Lyra's map. The carvings were dull, lifeless, as if sleeping for 1,000 years. Without a word, Elara stepped forward, the star fragment humming in her palm. She placed it into a perfect, star-shaped depression at the altar's center. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a soft light bloomed from the fragment, flowing like liquid silver into the grooves of the carvings. One by one, the symbols ignited, tracing patterns of long-forgotten stars across the dark stone. The light coalesced above the altar, shimmering into a three-dimensional image of the night sky. But this was no static map. Stars pulsed and drifted, their paths weaving together into a complex, tightening knot of brilliant energy. A voice, neither male nor female, but clear and resonant like a crystal chime, echoed from the stone itself. It spoke of a convergence, a rare celestial alignment when the barriers between realms grew thin and the power of the stars flowed freely into the world. This alignment was the key to reforging the pact, the only chance to restore the bond, but the voice held a note of profound urgency. The convergence approaches, it intoned. The window to act is narrow. The favor of the stars is not a right of birth, but a trust that must be earned anew by each generation. You must prove your people's worth before the celestial gates close once more. The holographic sky flickered and vanished, the symbols on the altar fading back to inert stone. The message was clear. Their quest was not just about remembering the past, but about earning a future. And the stars were no longer just watching, they were waiting. The silence of the forest felt wrong. It was a thick, heavy blanket, smothering the usual chorus of life, broken only by the crunch of their own footsteps. Finn froze, his hunter's senses screaming a warning an instant before the shadows between the trees began to writhe. Figures emerged, their forms shifting and indistinct, like smoke given a terrible purpose. They were elven in shape, but twisted, their features blurred into a mask of roiling darkness, and their eyes burned with a cold, hungry light. They moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, and they were converging on Elara. The star fragment at her chest flared in response, a beacon that had drawn these hunters from the deep woods. Finn nocked an arrow, but his aim wavered. He saw the tattered remnants of traditional tribal markings on one creature's arm, a style his own people had not woven for centuries. These were not mere beasts. They were elves, or they had been. A cold dread settled in his gut. Elara stumbled back as the shadows closed in, their chilling presence sapping the warmth from the air. Desperation clawed at her. She clutched the fragment, pouring all her will into a single, silent plea for protection. The artifact answered. A wave of pure, brilliant starlight erupted from her, a silent shockwave of celestial energy. It did not burn, but it washed over the shadowy forms, causing them to shriek and recoil, as if scalded by pure water. The darkness clinging to them writhed and thinned, and for a fleeting moment, Finn saw the terrified faces of the elves trapped within before the shadows swallowed them again, forcing the creatures to retreat into the gloom. The pulse faded, and Elara collapsed to her knees, the light in the fragment dimming to a faint, weary glow. The cost of that defense was written in her pale face and trembling hands. Finn was at her side in an instant, his bow forgotten. He looked from her exhausted form to the empty space where the creatures had vanished. They were not random monsters, he whispered, his voice tight with a horrifying realization. They were our people. Something in this forest, some forgotten magic or a lingering curse, is corrupting them, twisting them into those things. The attack was not just a random danger of the wild. It was a symptom. Their quest to reconnect with the stars had inadvertently shone a light on a festering wound within the world itself, a corruption that preyed upon the very essence of the Eldar. And now that darkness knew they were here, the silence of the forest was a lie. Back in the Eldar village, a storm of fear had broken. Elder Kale stood before the gathered tribe, his face a mask of grim certainty. The shadowy attack, he declared, was no random misfortune. It was a curse, a direct consequence of Elara's defiance. She has awakened a sleeping darkness with her celestial meddling, he thundered, his voice cutting through the anxious murmurs of the crowd. She has chosen the whispers of dead stars over the safety of her own people. By the ancient laws, she is exiled. She may not return until she renounces the sky and the false hope it offers. When Elara and Finn emerged from the tree line, they were met not with welcome, but with a wall of fearful, averted eyes and Kale's unyielding judgment. Her heart fractured, not from the sentence, but from the sight of her own family standing with the elders, their faces filled with a grief that mirrored her own. To them, she was no longer a daughter of the forest, but a bringer of ruin. Renounce the stars, Kale repeated, his tone final, or wander forever as a ghost to your own kin. Elara looked from his hardened eyes to the star fragment, its gentle pulse a steady truth against the tide of their fear. She could not renounce what she knew to be real. With a final, sorrowful glance at the only home she had ever known, she turned her back on it. I choose the truth, she whispered, her voice quiet but clear. She walked away with Finn at her side, the path ahead uncertain, but her purpose now absolute. Kale's condemnation, meant to silence her, had instead given her a new mission. If her own tribe would not listen, she would find those who could. She would seek out the other star-touched, the exiles and the seekers scattered across the land. Their fellowship would not be bound by tribal laws or ancient fears, but by a shared connection to the heavens and a common enemy in the creeping darkness. Her exile was not an end, but a beginning, the first step in gathering the pieces of a shattered pact. The river did not flow with water, but with liquid light. Its banks were lined with softly pulsing fungi and willows whose drooping leaves shimmered with their own internal constellations. This was the place the star map had called the River of Light, a sanctuary that felt more like a dream than a real location. They found the healer, Sariel, kneeling at the water's edge, her hands submerged in the glowing current. When she lifted them, her fingers dripped with pure radiance, and she was not alone. A great forest cat, its form half consumed by the same writhing darkness that had attacked them, lay panting on the moss before her. Its eyes were wild with pain, but Sariel placed her luminous hands upon its head without fear. The shadows recoiled from her touch, hissing like steam. A soft, steady light flowed from her palms, seeping into the creature's corrupted flesh. The darkness fought back, twisting and clenching, but Sariel's Starlight was relentless. It was a gentle, patient tide washing over a stain, not erasing it with force, but soothing it into nothingness. Slowly, the shadows dissolved. The cat's breathing eased, its form settling back into its natural, solid state. With a soft blink, it nuzzled her hand before melting back into the forest, whole again. Sariel finally turned to them, her own exhaustion evident, but her eyes held a deep, calm light. "You carry the same calling I do," she said to Elara, her voice as serene as the flowing river. "The stars did not just make a pact with our people, they gave us gifts. A piece of their essence lives in a chosen few, sleeping in our blood for generations. My gift is to mend what the shadows break, but the corruption you saw is a sickness of imbalance. It preys on those who have lost their connection to the celestial rhythm. The convergence is not just a door to the stars. It is a chance to amplify these dormant gifts, to flood the world with enough light to cleanse this sickness at its root." She looked at the star fragment in Elara's hand, then at the determined set of Finn's jaw. "Alone, we can only heal one creature at a time. Together, with the power of the convergence, we might heal the world." Without another word, Sariel gathered a pouch of glowing river moss and fell into step beside them. Her presence was a quiet promise, a living testament that the stars' gifts were not weapons, but remedies. For the first time since her exile, Elara felt a genuine, unshakable hope. They were not just gathering a fellowship, they were assembling a cure. The air grew cold and still as the earth swallowed them whole. Their path led not over the next ridge, but deep into the heart of the mountain, into the crystal caves. The moment they stepped inside, the world fractured. The walls were not simple stone, but vast pillars of living crystal that caught the faint glow of the star fragment and splintered it into 1,000 shimmering beams. Each facet did not merely reflect light, it reflected possibility, glimpses of what might be danced around them, fragmented and dizzying. Finn saw a fleeting image of his village celebrating a great hunt, then just as quickly, one of it burning. Sariel watched a forest bloom with unprecedented life, only to see it wither into dust a moment later. The caves were not a place of answers, but of questions, a labyrinth of potential futures. Elara, drawn to the largest crystal at the chamber's heart, pressed her palm against its cool, smooth surface. The world dissolved into a single, coherent vision. She saw the Eldar tribes, all of them, gathered under a sky, blazing with the convergence. Their faces, once marked by fear and separation, were upturned in wonder, their hands linked as starlight washed over them, healing the land and banishing the shadows. It was everything she had dreamed of, a perfect, radiant harmony. Then the vision twisted. A figure stood beside her in the celestial glow, a trusted companion, their face obscured by the brilliant light. But she saw their hand, and in it, a dagger of pure darkness, poised to strike not at her, but at the heart of the star, Fragment itself. The act would shatter the pact forever, plunging the world into an age of permanent shadow. The betrayal was so swift, so intimate, that it stole her breath. The vision shattered, leaving her gasping in the fractured light. She had to warn the others, but how could she speak of a betrayal when she did not know the betrayer? Trust, their greatest weapon, had just become their most profound vulnerability. Shaking, she broke a small shard from the great crystal. The moment it touched the star fragment, the artifact flared with newfound intensity, its light burning brighter and clearer than ever before. But the cave itself seemed to react to this amplified power. A deep groan echoed through the chambers, and the ceiling above them began to crack, massive crystals breaking loose and crashing to the floor, sealing the entrance. "We are trapped," Finn shouted over the roar of falling stone. His practical eyes scanned the collapsing chamber, finding no exit. Elara stood frozen, the vision of betrayal warring with the immediate peril. It was Sariel who acted, her voice calm amidst the chaos. "The light," she said, pointing. "The new shard focuses it. Show it the way." Understanding dawned on Elara. She held the amplified fragment aloft, not randomly, but focusing her will, picturing the path to freedom. The artifact responded, projecting a single, unwavering beam of starlight that sliced through the chaotic reflections. It illuminated a narrow fissure in the wall, one they had missed, a path not of crystal, but of solid rock. Finn, using his strength, pried the opening wider, while Sariel supported a trembling section of the ceiling with a lattice of solidified light. They scrambled through the new tunnel, just as the main chamber collapsed into a tomb of glittering dust. They emerged into the open air, coughing and breathless, the weight of the mountain replaced by the heavier weight of Elara's secret. As they pressed onward, the triumphant image of a united people was forever marred by the shadow of the dagger. She looked at Finn's reliable back and Sariel's serene face, and the terrible question echoed in her mind with every step. "Which one of you will destroy us?" The lake was a perfect, dark mirror, holding the entire night sky in its still embrace. On its shore stood a lone elf, his silver hair reflecting the starlight as he adjusted a complex device of polished brass and crystal aimed at the heavens. He did not look at them as they approached, his attention fixed on the cosmos above and its duplicate below. "You are late," he stated, his voice calm and measured. The Weaver's Web constellation has already shifted 3 degrees from its predicted path. The calculations are becoming more difficult. This was Orion, the astronomer the old tales spoke of, the one who had traded tribal life for a conversation with the stars. Elara stepped forward, the star fragment pulsing in her hand as if greeting an old friend. Orion finally turned, his eyes scanning their small group before settling on the artifact. He gave a slow, knowing nod, so the summons was heard. "I have spent a lifetime mapping the silence that followed the broken pact." His gaze was not unkind, but intensely focused, as if he saw them as pieces on a celestial board. He led them to a sheltered alcove where scrolls covered in complex star charts were weighted down by smooth, dark stones. "The convergence is not a single event," he explained, tracing a path across one map. "It is a key turning in a lock, but to open the door, you need more than a key. You need 3 celestial artifacts, placed at 3 specific points of power during the peak of the Lyrid meteor shower, when the veil is thinnest." He pointed to 3 symbols on the map that glowed with a faint, ethereal light. "The star heart you carry is one. The second is the Moon Singer, a crystal that resonates with lunar light, hidden in the sunken city. The third is the Sun Drinker, a vessel that captures the first and last rays of the day, held atop the Spire of Dawn. His words laid out the true, staggering scale of their quest. It was a race across the continent, a test of precision and timing against the unforgiving clock of the heavens. The shadows you have encountered, Orion continued, his tone growing graver, are merely a symptom. They are a spiritual decay, a rot that sets in when a people forget their place in the cosmos. The star's influence is a light that keeps such darkness at bay. As that light fades, the shadows grow stronger, twisting all they touch. You are not just rebuilding a bridge to the stars. You are fighting an infection that is consuming our world from the inside out. Orion's knowledge was the missing piece they desperately needed, a map and a diagnosis all in one. Yet as Elara looked at the vast distances on the charts, the 3 impossible artifacts they had to retrieve, and the narrow window of time they had to do it, the weight of it all threatened to crush her newfound hope. The quest was no longer a pilgrimage. It was a battle for existence itself, and the army consisted of 1 dreamer, 1 hunter, 1 healer, and 1 astronomer who spoke to the sky. The lake's mirror-smooth surface, shattered as tendrils of living shadow, erupted from its depths. These were not the mindless, corrupted elves they had faced before. These shadows moved with a chilling coordination, flanking them, cutting off escape routes with a predatory intelligence that spoke of a single, guiding will. Sariel's hands flared with healing light, forcing 1 tendril back, but 2 more snaked around her defenses. Finn's arrows passed through the darkness as if it were smoke, only for it to reform instantly. They were being herded, tested, like prey being cornered by a hunter who knew the forest better than they ever could. Orion did not flinch. His eyes were fixed on the chaotic patterns the shadows wove in the air, his mind racing through a lifetime of celestial charts and forgotten lore. "This is no random sickness," he shouted over the chaos, his voice cutting through the panic. "This is a strategy, a consciousness." He watched as the tendrils avoided the direct light of the star Fragment, not out of mere instinct, but with calculated precision, always striking from the periphery. The pieces of an ancient puzzle locked together in his mind. The Void Weaver, he breathed, the name itself feeling like a chill wind. "I thought it was only a myth, a cautionary tale from the age of the first pact," he explained as they fought, his words sharp and urgent. "The Void Weaver is not a creature of this world, but an entity born from the absolute silence between stars. It feeds on isolation and forgetfulness. It thrives in the void left when connections are severed. For eons, it has sought to unravel the bond between our people and the heavens, because that bond is a light it cannot endure. The corruption we see, the shadow-taken elves, are not its goal. They are merely its tools, a means to an end. Its true purpose is to ensure the convergence fails, to cut the thread of starlight forever and plunge our world into a permanent, starless night, where it alone holds dominion." The revelation struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. This was no longer a quest to rediscover a forgotten past. It was a war for the future. The malevolent force now had a name, and with that name came a terrifying clarity. The Void Weaver was not just attacking them. It was actively working to make the elves unworthy of the star's pact, fostering the fear and isolation that gave it strength. Every shadow, Every act of corruption was a deliberate move in a cosmic game, and they were not merely players. They were the final pieces on the board, the last fragile barrier between their world and an endless hunger. As the last of the tendrils receded into the now still lake, the silence felt heavier, charged with a new and profound dread. They had come seeking answers about a celestial event. They now faced an ancient enemy that saw their very existence as a flaw in the cosmos. The race for the artifacts was no longer just about fulfilling a prophecy. It was a desperate sprint to gather their defenses before a timeless, patient darkness closed its jaws for good. The forest floor swallowed all sound, creating a suffocating stillness. Then the whispers began, not from the trees, but from the air itself. Finn heard the desperate cries of his family calling for help just beyond the next thicket. Sariel was tormented by the agonized moans of countless corrupted creatures, a chorus of pain that seemed to come from every direction. Orion heard the cold, mocking voice of Elder Kale, listing every astronomical calculation he had ever gotten wrong, declaring his life's work a useless fantasy. The phantom voices were perfectly tailored weapons, each one a reflection of their deepest insecurities and fears, pulling them apart with cruel efficiency. In the disorienting haze, Elara found herself utterly alone. The star fragment on her chest felt heavy, its light muted by the oppressive magic of the woods. She realized this was not a natural place. It was a trap, designed to exploit doubt and break bonds. Closing her eyes against the false pleas of her own family, she poured every ounce of her will into the artifact, not to create a shield, but to project a single, pure note of truth. A soft chime resonated from the fragment, a sound that cut through the deceptive whispers without overpowering them. It was a frequency of absolute reality, a gentle reminder of their shared purpose. One by one, the others stopped, turning away from the phantom cries and toward the sound of that clear, unwavering tone. They regrouped in a small clearing, their faces pale, their trust in their own senses shattered. Sariel knelt, placing her hands on the moss. The usual flow of life energy from the forest was thin and erratic. "This distortion is not the forest's true nature," she said, her voice weary. "It is sick. The Void Weaver is not just creating shadows. It is draining the world's inherent magic, turning places of power into engines of despair. Its influence is a poison that weakens everything it touches." Reunited, they pressed on, but the cost was evident. Elara leaned heavily on Finn, the effort of projecting the beacon having drained her severely. Each challenge was whittling away their strength, forcing them to rely on each other in ways they never had before. The forest had tried to break them with lies, but in choosing to follow a shared truth, their fragile fellowship was slowly being forged into something unbreakable, even as their bodies and spirits grew weary. The chasm opened before them without a sound, a vast tear in the world, so deep its bottom was lost in a blue-tinged gloom. The only way across was a bridge that was not a bridge at all, but three narrow, shimmering beams of solidified starlight that hummed with a low, resonant energy. They looked as insubstantial as mist, yet when Elara cautiously tapped one with her foot, it felt as solid and unyielding as granite. Orion studied the phenomenon with a scholar's intensity. "The light responds to conviction," he murmured. "It will hold if your will holds, but if your courage wavers, so will the path beneath your feet." Finn stared into the abyss, his face a pale mask. The hunter who faced shadow monsters without flinch was utterly undone by the sheer, empty drop. Heights were a deep, primal fear, a weakness he had always hidden. "I cannot," he whispered, the words torn from him. "I will fall." Elara placed a hand on his arm. "The stars do not ask for fearlessness," she said softly. "They ask for courage, and courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to walk through it. One of us must go first to prove the way is possible. It has to be you." The weight of her trust was a heavier burden than the chasm below. Finn closed his eyes, his knuckles white as he gripped his bow. He thought of his family, of the corrupted elves, of the world slowly succumbing to shadow. Their quest needed a leader in this moment, not just a guide. With a shuddering breath, he stepped onto the first beam. The light flared under his boot, and for a terrifying second, it seemed to flicker. A collective gasp went through the group. Finn froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He did not look down. He fixed his gaze on the far side and took another step, then another, each one a battle against the vertigo screaming in his mind. He focused only on the next footfall, on the steady hum of the light, on the belief that he could do this. Halfway across, the beam narrowed. He felt a tremor of doubt, and the path beneath him wavered, becoming momentarily translucent. A cry of pure will escaped his lips, and he surged forward, running the last few steps until he tumbled onto the solid ground of the far ledge. He lay there, breathing heavily, the terror slowly receding, replaced by a wave of triumphant relief. His success was a tangible force. One by one, the others crossed, their own passages steady and sure, inspired by his hard-won victory. Elara was the last, her steps light and confident, the star fragment glowing brightly on her chest. On the other side, they found a small, circular clearing, dominated by a crumbling stone altar, a forgotten star shrine. Vines choked the carved pillars, but the inscriptions on the central stone were still clear. Sariel traced the elegant, flowing script. "It speaks of sacrifice," she read aloud, her voice hushed, not of life, but of self. To be worthy of the star's guidance, one must be willing to surrender pride, to offer up one's deepest fears upon the altar of courage. Only then can the vessel be filled with true light. Finn stood a little taller, the words resonating deep within him. He had not slain a great beast or performed a mighty deed, but he had offered his fear, and in doing so, he had been remade. His role was no longer just the practical hunter. He was the steadfast heart of their fellowship, the one who proved that the path was walkable, no matter how impossible it seemed. His personal trial was a mirror for them all, a stark reminder that worthiness was not a gift, but something earned with every step taken through the darkness. The path into the Heartwood Grove felt less like a journey and more like a homecoming. Ancient trees formed a vast, living cathedral, their canopies so dense, they wove the very sunlight into a soft, green-tinted haze. The air itself tasted of damp earth and blooming night flowers, and a profound, resonant silence hung over everything, a silence that was not empty, but full of a deep, patient life. In the center of the grove stood the Guardian, a being not merely of the forest, but seemingly the forest itself given form. It was a treant, its bark like gnarled silver, its branches holding constellations of glowing moss, and its eyes were pools of still, dark water that reflected the sky. It did not speak with a voice of wind or wood, but with a thought that bloomed directly in their minds. "You carry the star heart. we have felt its distant pulse, a rhythm we have missed from many turnings of the world. It regarded them each in turn, its gaze lingering on the star fragment at Elara's chest. Long ago, when the world was young and the stars sang more clearly, they looked down upon the first of your kind. They did not choose the Eldar for their strength or their cunning. They chose you for your harmony. You listened to the whispers of the growing leaf and the flowing stream. You understood that you were not masters of this world, but its stewards. This harmony was the foundation of the pact. The stars provided guidance and light from above, and your people tended to the living light of the world below. It was a balance, but that song is fading. The Treant's thought carried a profound sorrow. The isolation of your tribes, the fear that walls you in, the creeping shadow that twists life into despair. These are all symptoms of a broken rhythm. You have forgotten the second part of the covenant. You have forgotten how to listen to the earth that sustains you. The harmony is breaking, and with it, your claim to the stars' favor weakens. The great being then extended a branch, and from its tip, a single seed, no larger than a dewdrop, began to glow with a soft, internal light. It pulsed with the same steady rhythm as the star fragment. This is a seed from the first star tree, planted by the celestial guides when they first forged the pact with your ancestors. It holds the memory of that perfect harmony. The Treant placed the glowing seed into Elara's open palm. It was warm and hummed with a gentle power. For the convergence to truly work, for the bond to be renewed and not merely remembered, this seed must be planted at the moment of celestial alignment. The artifacts will open the door, but this will be the life that grows on the other side. It is the hope of rebirth for your people and for this world. But it is a fragile hope. It will only sprout if the ground is ready to receive it, if the hearts of those present are truly open to the old ways of connection. If you fail, the seed will remain dormant, and the last echo of that original harmony will be lost forever. The weight of the seed in her hand felt immense, containing not just a future tree, but the entire soul of her people's promise. Their quest had just gained its most poignant and fragile purpose. They were no longer just retrieving lost objects. They were carrying the very potential for a new beginning, a tiny, glowing ember of a world that once was and could be again. The silence in the grove became a cage. Orion would not meet their eyes, his gaze fixed on the star charts he had meticulously drawn. The confession, when it finally came, was quiet and stripped bare. I was not always an observer, he began, his voice a hollow echo of its usual certainty. Once, I believed the star's power was a prize to be claimed. I sought to harness it, to make my name legendary among the tribes. In my arrogance, I performed a ritual to pull a sliver of celestial essence into a focusing crystal. I did not know I was not pulling energy, but punching a hole. The void that answered was not empty. It was hungry. I gave the Void Weaver its first crack in the door, a tiny fracture through which its influence has seeped into our world ever since. Every shadow, every corrupted soul, traces its origin back to my pride. The admission hung in the air, a poison cloud. Finn's hand went to his knife, his face a storm of betrayal. You led us here, you gave us this grand mission, all while knowing you were the reason it was necessary. Your knowledge is built on a lie. Sariel looked as if she had been physically struck, her healing light seeming to dim. You spoke of spiritual decay, she whispered, while carrying the very rod inside you. Elara felt the world tilt. The vision from the crystal caves slammed back into her. The trusted companion, the dagger of darkness. It was not Finn or Sariel. It was the one who had always seemed to have all the answers. Orion did not plead. He simply stood, accepting their judgment. I fight for redemption, not for forgiveness, he said. My knowledge is the only weapon I have to atone for the weapon I created. The path to the sunken city is a labyrinth of illusions. The Spire of Dawn cannot be climbed without understanding the solar winds. You can cast me out, but you will be blinding yourselves on the eve of the final battle. The choice was a chasm deeper than any they had crossed. Could they trust a guide who had already led the enemy to their door? Was his crucial knowledge worth the constant fear that his past failings might sabotage their future? Their unity, their greatest strength, now had a fissure running straight through its heart, and the fate of the world depended on whether that crack could ever be sealed. The silence stretched thin and brittle as ice. Elara looked from Orion's bowed head to the raw hurt in Finn's and Sariel's eyes. A clean break, casting him out, would feel righteous, but it would be a victory for the very void that sought to divide them. His knowledge was a tainted blade, but it was the only one that could cut through the illusions ahead. We are all broken in some way, she said, her voice quiet but firm. We carry our fears, our past failures, our grief. Orion carries his. But if we let that break us apart, the Void Weaver wins without a fight. He stays. But he walks in front, where we can all see the path he chooses. His guilt is now our shared burden, and his redemption is our only path forward. The terms were harsh but fair, a leash of trust, both given and withheld. Orion accepted them with a solemn nod, the weight of their conditional faith seeming to settle on his shoulders, straightening his posture with a new, grim purpose. He turned his shame into fuel. With a scholar's focus, he laid their 3 artifacts side by side, the pulsing star heart, the quiet seed of the first star tree, and the shard from the crystal caves. They do not just hold power, he explained. They hold memory, a memory of alignment. Watch. He did not touch them, but began to chant in the old tongue, words of alignment and resonance. The star fragment flared, its light flowing into the crystal shard, which amplified it, bathing the dormant seed in a radiant glow. The seed responded, not by sprouting, but by pulsing in a slow, deep rhythm. Then, as one, the 3 artifacts lifted from the ground, spinning in a tight, harmonious orbit. From their center, a single, unwavering beam of silver light shot forth, pointing like a finger toward a distant, jagged peak, silhouetted against the twilight. The Starfall Spire, Orion whispered, the heart of the convergence. Their compass was born not of metal, but of trust and forgiveness, a fragile alliance made tangible. As they began the final march, a new dynamic settled over the group. Finn kept a wary eye on Orion, but his protection now extended to include the Astronomer. Sariel's healing light, when she offered Orion a sip of water, seemed to soothe not just his physical fatigue, but the ragged edges of his spirit. They were a patchwork fellowship, stitched together with threads of doubt and hope, but they were united. The beam from their celestial compass did not waver, a constant reminder that their greatest strength was not in being flawless, but in choosing to move forward together, a single, determined light against the encroaching dark. Darkness fell like a final curtain, and with it came the whispers. They slithered into the camp, twisting dreams into nightmares. Finn jerked awake, his knife already in his hand, convinced he saw Orion whispering to a shadowy form just beyond the firelight. Sariel cried out, her healing energy flaring defensively against a phantom attack from Finn's direction. Orion stood paralyzed, his calculations useless against the emotional chaos, seeing his own past failure mirrored in the terrified eyes of his companions. The Void Weaver was not attacking their bodies, but the fragile trust they had just rebuilt, turning their campsite into a cage of paranoia and fear. In that moment of splintering despair, Elara did not try to reason with them. She slammed the star fragment against the earth. A dome of pure, silent starlight erupted from the artifact, enveloping the four of them in a sanctuary of radiant calm. The terrifying illusions shattered against its surface like glass. Inside the dome, the air was clear, the only sound their ragged breaths. They looked at each other, shame and relief pouring on their faces, their shared panic a testament to how easily they had been broken. But the shield's brilliant light was a beacon in the unnatural dark, and it demanded a response. From the deepest shadows of the forest, a consciousness focused upon them. It was not a physical form, but a crushing weight of absolute negation, a voice that was the absence of sound, speaking directly into their souls. You carry a spark in a universe of nothing. You will be extinguished. The pressure was immense, a psychic assault that promised oblivion. The shield of Starlight wavered under the direct attention of its ancient enemy. Elara gritted her teeth, pouring all of her strength, all of her belief into the fragment. She felt the others close around her, Finn's steadying hand on her shoulder, Sariel's healing light bolstering her own, Orion's knowledge of the enemy lending her resolve. Together, they held the line. The presence withdrew as suddenly as it had come, but the message was seared into their minds. This was no longer a conflict fought with shadows and corrupted elves. The Void Weaver itself now saw them as the primary threat. Their mission was laid bare in the chilling silence that followed. The enemy would stop at nothing to ensure they never reached the Spire, and their only hope was to run the final leg of its gauntlet, a race where every shadow could be a trap and every moment of doubt a weapon. The desert wind did not howl, it whispered. It carried the scent of cold stone and ozone, 1,000 voices woven into a single, urgent plea. The compass of light led them across dunes that shifted like solid waves, their footsteps swallowed by the endless, pale sand. But the whispers were their true guide now, a chorus of star song, growing more frantic with each passing hour. They are not just speaking to us, Orion said, his face etched with a new, profound dread. They are screaming. The Void Weaver is not merely waiting for us to fail. It is actively attacking the source. It is poisoning the stellar pathways themselves, unraveling the very threads of light we need to cross. The whispers spoke of a celestial bridge, woven from ancient promises, now fraying under a relentless assault of nothingness. If those pathways collapse before the convergence, there will be no door to open, no light to channel. The pact will not just be broken, it will be unmade, as if it never was. A single, stark fact settled over them, as heavy and suffocating as the desert heat. The convergence was not a distant event on a chart. It was a deadline. The alignment would peak with the first rays of dawn. If they were not at the Spire, with the artifacts in place, by the time the sun breached the horizon, Then the final, frayed connection between their world and the stars would snap. The pressure was a physical weight, crushing their hope and shortening their breath. Every grain of sand in the hourglass felt like a planet falling. Finn scanned the stark horizon, his hunter's eyes seeing no shelter, no shortcut. Sariel's healing light could not soothe the raw anxiety that tightened her chest. Orion's calculations were useless against the simple, brutal march of time. They ran until their lungs burned and their muscles screamed, the compass beam, a relentless needle pulling them forward. The whispers became a wind at their backs, a final, desperate push from the heavens themselves. The race was no longer against a hidden enemy, but against the dying of the light, and the dawn was coming. The Starfall Spire was a blade of obsidian, aimed at the heart of the sky. As they stumbled from the desert's edge, its impossible height stole the air from their lungs, the peak lost in the swirling celestial energies of the approaching convergence. But the path to its base was barred. A circle of elves stood motionless before the single, winding stair that led upward, their forms sheathed in the familiar, writhing darkness. Yet these were different. Through the shifting shadows, they could see faint, pulsing marks on the elves' foreheads, the faded, ghostly sigils of the star touch. These were not random victims of the corruption. They were the very seekers the stars had once called, now twisted into the final, cruelest guardians of the Spire. Finn nocked an arrow, his face a mask of grim resolve. "We fight through," he said, his voice tight. "There is no other way." Sariel stepped forward, her hands already glowing with soft, healing light. "No," she insisted, her gaze fixed on the tormented figures. "To fight them is to complete their corruption. It would prove the Void Weaver right, that our only answer to darkness is violence. We must try to reach them, to purify them." Orion studied the trapped elves, his scholarly mind seeing the terrible symmetry. "The Void Weaver turns their own gifts against them," he murmured. "Their connection to the stars, which should be their strength, has been perverted into a chain. It is the perfect trap. To destroy them is to betray our purpose. To try and save them could cost us everything." The moral weight of the choice settled on them, heavier than the mountain itself. Time was bleeding away, the sky above growing brighter with the impending dawn, and the only path forward was blocked by their own kind, their souls imprisoned in a nightmare. Elara's hand went to the star fragment, its pulse a frantic rhythm against her palm. She looked at the nearest guardian, a female elf whose star sigil flickered like a drowning ember beneath the shadows. She met the elf's eyes, and for a fleeting second, she did not see a monster. She saw a reflection of herself, a seeker who had answered the call, only to be consumed by the very silence she sought to fill. "We cannot win this war by becoming what we fight," Elara said, her decision solidifying into unshakable certainty. "We do not fight them, we fight for them." The cost of this victory would be measured not in defeated enemies, but in the time and energy spent on a desperate act of compassion, a gamble that might leave them too weak to complete their final task. The personal risk was terrifyingly real, a price they would have to pay with their own hope. Sariel stepped toward the nearest guardian, her hands raised not in attack, but in offering. The shadow-clad elf snarled, a sound like tearing silk, and lunged. Finn was there in an instant, not with his bow, but using his own body as a shield, grappling the corrupted elf to hold it still. Do it, he grunted, straining against the surprisingly strong, cold form. Sariel placed one hand on the elf's shuddering chest, and the other on the warm, humming seed in her pouch. She poured her healing light through the seed, and the effect was immediate and profound. A gentle, green-gold radiance flowed from her palms, a light that felt like the first dawn of the world. Where it touched the writhing shadows, they did not vanish in a flash, but slowly unwove themselves, like knots being patiently loosened by an unseen hand. The process was agonizingly slow. Each thread of darkness resisted, clinging to the elf spirit with a desperate, hungry will. Sariel's face was beaded with sweat, her own light dimming with a tremendous effort. Finn held fast, his muscles screaming, watching as the shadowy veil thinned to reveal the terrified face of a young elf beneath, her star sigil flickering back to life like a rekindled flame. With a final, soft sigh, the last of the darkness dissolved. The elf, cleansed and bewildered, collapsed into Finn's arms. He lowered her gently to the ground, but there was no time for rest. Dozens more guardians stood between them and the Spire's base. Every soul they saved was a victory, but each one cost them precious minutes they did not have. The sky was already lightening from black to deep indigo in the east. High above, the climb was its own kind of battle. The obsidian steps of the Spire were not merely steep, they were enchanted. With every step Elara and Orion took, the stones seemed to drink a sliver of their life force. A crushing weariness settled into their bones, and a cold mist of despair clouded their thoughts, whispering that they were too late, that their efforts were pointless. Elara focused on the star fragment, using its steady pulse to anchor her will, to remind her why they had come so far. Orion, drawing on his deep well of scholarly resolve, recited celestial equations like a mantra, using the pure logic of the cosmos to wall out the magical fatigue. They did not speak, saving every ounce of breath for the ascent. Below, they could see the tiny, brilliant flashes of Sariel's light and Finn's struggling form as they fought their war of mercy. Each flash represented another delay, another painful choice between the immediate need of a single soul and the desperate need of the entire world. Elara's heart ached with the duality of their mission. To rush ahead and abandon their companions and the corrupted would be a betrayal of everything they had learned about harmony. To stay and help would be to fail in their ultimate duty. They had to trust that their fellowship, though divided, was still one. They climbed, the weight of every rescued life and every lost second, making the stone steps feel like mountains themselves. The final step onto the Spire's peak was like stepping into a storm of pure light. The lurid meteor shower had begun, not as distant streaks, but as a torrent of living fire that scorched the sky, their trails weaving a tapestry of impossible brilliance. Yet at the very center of this celestial vortex, a wound of absolute nothingness swirled into being. The Void Weaver, given form, it had no body, only a crushing absence that pulled at their souls, and its voice was the sound of hope dying. Elara, it hissed, a vibration that shook the obsidian beneath her feet. You are a spark ignited by a mistake. Orion's knowledge was a shield, his mind a fortress of star charts and equations, but the entity bypassed it entirely. It did not attack his intellect, but his heart. You sought to master the cosmos, and instead you unleashed me. Your legacy is nothing but ruin, a vision of a world forever gray, of stars gone silent, of the corrupted elves wandering eternally all because of his one moment of pride, slammed into his mind with the force of a physical blow. He cried out, stumbling to his knees as the weight of 1,000 lifetimes of guilt threatened to crush him. Elara fought her own battle. The Void Weaver showed her Finn and Sariel, fallen on the stairs below, their light extinguished because she had been too slow, too trusting. "Mighty is the price of harmony," the voice echoed. "Your faith is a weapon that kills those you swore to protect." She gritted her teeth, the star fragment flaring against the onslaught, but the despair was a cold tide rising. It was Orion who broke the cycle. He looked up from his knees, not at the entity, but at Elara. His eyes, once full of scholarly detachment, now held a profound and peaceful clarity. "My knowledge was my prison," he said, his voice steady despite the psychic storm. "But my choice can be my freedom." He rose to his feet, and instead of reciting equations, he began to chant the true, original words of the celestial pact. The words of connection he had spent a lifetime studying, but had never truly understood. He was not fighting the void. He was embracing his role within the great pattern, accepting his flaw as part of the whole. He poured every ounce of his spirit, his regret, his hard-won humility into the chant. A brilliant, selfless light erupted from him, a supernova of pure intent. He did not attack the Void Weaver, but walked directly into its core. The entity recoiled, its form destabilizing, unable to process a power born not of control, but of sacrifice. For a single, shattering moment, the vortex of darkness writhed, its focus broken, its terrifying presence disrupted by an act it could not comprehend. "Go, Elara," Orion's voice echoed in her mind, faint but sure. "The path is open. Finish it." His light dissolved, leaving behind a profound silence and a cleared space before the altar. His redemption was complete, paid for with everything he had. The ultimate confrontation was now hers alone, a lone elf standing against the tide of nothingness, with the fate of two worlds trembling in the balance. The moment Orion's light faded, Elara moved. Her hands did not tremble as she placed the 3 artifacts into the altar's waiting depressions. The star heart pulsed in the center, flanked by the amplifying crystal shard and the dormant seed of the first star tree. She laid her palms flat on the cold obsidian, closing her eyes, and poured every memory, every hope, every fragment of her will into the ritual. She thought of Finn's courage on the light bridge, Sariel's compassionate light, and Orion's final sacrifice. She was not one elf, but the heart of a fellowship, and she channeled their combined strength into the stone. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then the world erupted. The 3 artifacts blazed like captured suns, their light merging into a single, searing pillar that shot upward into the storm of meteors. The celestial fire responded, not as random streaks, but as guided lances of pure energy. Dozens of meteors shifted their paths, arcing down to strike the spire itself, not with destructive force, but as rivers of liquid starlight that poured down its obsidian sides and flooded the altar. The energy focused on the seed. It glowed, then swelled, its outer shell cracking to reveal a tender, radiant shoot. It grew not like a normal tree, but in a burst of silent, impossible speed, branches of woven light stretching toward the heavens, while roots of solidified brilliance plunged through the mountain stone. It was the new star tree, a living nexus of celestial power, and as its roots spread unseen beneath the world, a wave of gentle light pulsed outward across the land. The gray deserts bloomed with color, The corrupted forest sighed as shadows lifted from their leaves. Far below, the remaining guardian elves stilled as the cleansing wave washed over them, the darkness dissolving from their forms like mist in a sudden sunrise. The star's power was flooding back into the world, a tide of healing and remembrance. But the Void Weaver, wounded and enraged by this resurgence, gathered the last of its essence. From the dissipating vortex of nothingness, it forged a single, final weapon, a spear of absolute oblivion, silent and cold, and hurled it not at Elara, but at the heart of the newborn star tree. This was its last gambit. If it could not stop the light from returning, it would poison the source itself. The spear of nothingness flew, a shard of pure silence aimed at the heart of the newborn tree. Elara had no weapon to block it, no shield to raise. Instinct, older than memory, took over. She opened her mouth, and a single, clear note rang out across the peak. It was the first word of the hymn of roots and sky, a melody her people had not sung for generations. The notes were not her own, but rose from the star fragment on her chest, from the memory in the seed, from the very light of the tree itself. As she sang, the spear of darkness slowed, its progress hindered not by a wall, but by the thickening air of a world remembering its song. Her voice, amplified by the radiant tree, did not attack the void. It wove a tapestry of connection. She sang of starlight on the first leaves, of elven hands planting the first forests under celestial guidance, of the shared breath between the earth and the heavens. The Void Weaver shrieked, a sound of tearing reality, as the harmony became a tangible force, an antidote to its essence of isolation. It was not one voice, but one heart. And then it became many far below. The elf Finn and Sariel had just cleansed lifted her head, her lips parting to join the melody. Across the deserts, in hidden groves, and on lonely mountain paths, other star-touched elves, the outcasts, the seekers, the quietly faithful, felt the resonance in their blood. A hunter looked up from his trap, his voice a low hum. A weaver at her loom let a thread of song join the cosmic pattern. An elder in a secluded village, who had kept the old ways in secret, closed her eyes and sang. One by one, then in a swelling chorus, their voices joined Elara's. They were not singing to her, but with her, through her, their individual threads of light and sound, braiding together into a single, unbreakable cord of shared faith. This was the true power of the pact, not a weapon to be wielded, but a harmony to be joined. The collective song washed over the Void Weaver, and where there was only connection, it could find no purchase. Its form, built from fear and isolation, had nothing to cling to. With a final, silent implosion, the entity of nothingness collapsed into itself and vanished, unmade by the very thing it sought to destroy. The last echo of the hymn faded, leaving behind a profound and peaceful silence. The darkness was gone, not defeated, but dispelled by a light that fear could no longer touch. The first true dawn in an age broke over the starfall spire, its light warm and forgiving. Across the land, the lingering corruption withered like frost under a rising sun, its shadows dissolving into harmless mist. At the base of the spire, the purified elves stirred, their eyes clearing as they awoke from a long and terrible dream. They looked at their own hands, then at the faces of their rescuers, a dawning understanding replacing the confusion. They were not merely freed from a curse, they were reawakened, their dormant connection to the celestial rhythm humming back to life within their veins. The great star tree stood above them all, its branches of woven light holding a permanent, gentle constellation, a living bridge between the earth and the sky. From the desert's edge, a procession emerged. The Eldar tribes, led by a silent and somber Elder Kale, had followed the great light and the echoes of the celestial hymn. They saw the cleansed land, the renewed seekers, and the three weary figures standing before the impossible tree. Kale's stern composure finally broke. He walked to Elara, his head bowed, the weight of his fear and pride visibly lifted from his shoulders. "We built walls to keep out the darkness," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but we only succeeded in locking ourselves inside. You saw a truth we were too afraid to face. You have not only saved our people, you have returned our souls to us. Welcome home." The cheers that rose from the gathered tribes were not just for victory, but for a future rediscovered. Elara, Finn, and Sariel stood together, their triumph tempered by the memory of Orion's sacrifice and the sheer scale of the task ahead. The long night had ended, but the harmony they had fought for was not a static prize to be won. It was a living thing, a song that required every voice to sustain it. The work of rebuilding their world, of teaching the old songs and tending the new light, was only just beginning. The star tree's roots pulsed with a gentle, steady light, a rhythm that now beat in the heart of the world itself. Around its immense trunk, the elders of every Elder tribe stood in a silent, unprecedented circle. Their faces, once etched with the lines of isolation and fear, were now upturned, reflecting the soft radiance from the branches above. Elder Kale stepped forward, his voice no longer a tool of command, but an instrument of humility. He spoke of walls dismantled and bridges rebuilt, not of wood and stone, but of trust and shared purpose. The old ways of solitary rule had proven fragile, collapsing into shadow when tested. A new covenant was needed, one as intertwined as the roots and the sky, and so the Council of the Celestial Heart was born. For the first time in living memory, the council would not be composed solely of elders chosen by birthright. Its seats would be shared, with voices from every tribe, and most importantly, with the star touched those like Sariel and Finn, whose gifts and experiences now served as a living compass for their people. When Kale turned to Elara, his offer was expected by all. She had been the spark, the unyielding heart that refused to let the light die. The title of High Guardian was hers for the taking, a position of ultimate authority to shape their reborn world. The gathering held its breath, awaiting her acceptance, but Elara simply smiled, a quiet, knowing expression that held the memory of deserts and crystal caves, and a final, selfless sacrifice. She placed a hand upon the warm bark of the star tree. "My place is not on a throne, but here," she said, her voice clear and sure. "A single leader, even a well-intentioned one, can become a new kind of wall. Our strength lies in the balance, the deep roots of tradition, tempered by the boundless guidance of the stars. I will remain a guardian of this tree, and a guide for those who seek its light." Her journey had come full circle. The young elf who once raced alone into a forbidden grove had not become a ruler, but a protector. Her wisdom was not in claiming power, but in understanding that true harmony requires every voice to be heard, and every song to find its place in the great celestial hymn. The star touch was no longer a whisper in the blood, but a clear and resonant song, Elara found she did not just feel the constellations, she could converse with them. The archer in the sky did not merely offer a shape for navigation, but shared a memory of ancient hunts, of paths carved through the void long before elves walked the earth. Finn, whose skills were once bound to the soil and the tracks upon it, now closed his eyes and saw the world mapped in silver threads of celestial light. He could walk through the deepest forest at midnight without a single misstep, guided by the gentle pull of starlight on the very air, and Sariel's gift, once focused on mending flesh and bone, now flowed into the spirit. She could sit with an elf haunted by the lingering echoes of the corruption, and with a touch and a soft hum, soothe the invisible scars the shadows had left behind. This was the true nature of the pact renewed. The stars had not given them weapons, but tools for rebuilding. A power held by one person could achieve little, but a gift shared could transform a society. Elara began gathering children and elders under the new star tree, not to lecture, but to listen. She taught them to quiet their minds and feel for the particular resonance of a single star, to understand that the sky was not a cold, distant ceiling, but a living, breathing presence. Finn started training the tribe's hunters and scouts, not to replace their earthly skills, but to augment them. He showed them how to read the subtle gradients of starlight, to predict weather shifts or find hidden springs, turning their roles from mere providers into wise stewards of the land. Sariel's work was perhaps the most profound. She established a sanctuary, a place where those still struggling with fear, grief, or the trauma of the shadow corruption could come. Her healing light did not erase their pain, but helped them weave it into the fabric of their being, transforming weakness into a source of empathy and strength. The gifts, they realized, were not for personal glory. They were a sacred responsibility, a debt of gratitude to the stars that could only be repaid by nurturing these sparks in others. This commitment to teaching became the bedrock of the new era. The old tribal boundaries, once so fiercely guarded, began to dissolve as elves traveled to learn from the star, touched of other communities. A weaver from the river tribes came to study the celestial patterns Elara described, weaving them into tapestries that told the story of their salvation. A storyteller from the mountain clans sat with Finn, learning the new star paths to carry tales and news between once distant villages. Cooperation was no longer an ideal, but a daily practice. Exploration was no longer just about mapping new territories, but about discovering the uncharted potential within their own renewed spirits. The stars had chosen the Eldar a second time, not for their harmony alone, but for their capacity to grow, to teach, and to build a world where every voice, earthly or celestial, could find its place in the grand and ever-evolving symphony. One morning, a new light shimmered beneath the great tree's canopy. A sapling, no taller than Elara's knee, had sprouted from the soil, its leaves pulsing with a soft, silver glow. Then another appeared, and another, until a small grove of these radiant young trees surrounded their parent. Elara knelt, her fingers brushing a leaf that hummed with a familiar celestial song. She did not see mere plants, but a promise. These are not just trees, she whispered to Finn and Sariel. They are beacons. For every sapling that blooms, a new star-touched soul will awaken somewhere in the world. The cycle was beginning anew, not as a singular, desperate event, but as a natural rhythm restored. The legacy of their quest would not be a monument, but a living, breathing lineage. The three friends understood their new purpose instantly. They would not remain solely as guides for their own people. They would become seekers once more, traveling to distant tribes and forgotten valleys to find these newly chosen elves. "We must find them before they feel alone," Sariel said, her healer's heart seeing the potential for isolation and fear in such a strange awakening. Finn, looking at the map of the world now alive with potential, nodded. "We can teach them what we learned the hard way, that their gift is not a curse, and they are not meant to walk their path in solitude. Their plan was born not of duty, but of love for the future." They would mentor these new generations, helping them understand the voice of the stars in their blood, showing them how to weave their unique gifts into the fabric of their communities. The Alliance would never again depend on a single prophecy or a lone hero. It would be sustained by a chain of guidance, a fellowship stretching across centuries, where every elder had once been a student, and every student would one day become a teacher. The echo of their quest would not fade, but would instead multiply, rippling through time in the lives of every star-touched elf they found and nurtured, ensuring the harmony between roots and sky would forever remain unbroken. The ink itself seemed spun from light, flowing across the parchment in rivers of silver and gold, as the elders of every tribe made their marks. One by one, they stepped forward under the anniversary meteor shower, a sky alive with the same celestial fire that had heralded their salvation. Their signatures were not mere names, but promises etched in starlight, a sacred vow to protect the star paths and uphold the values that had saved their world. Courage, unity, and curiosity were no longer abstract ideals, but the very foundation of their new covenant. As the final mark was made, Elara felt a shift in the air, a gentle pressure that was both immense and intimate. She looked up, and the constellations overhead seemed to pulse in unison, their light intensifying until the entire clearing was bathed in a soft, approving radiance. It was not a flash of power, but a slow, deep breath from the cosmos itself, a silent affirmation that echoed in the hearts of every elf present. In that shimmering moment, the past and the future were irrevocably woven together. The ancient pact, once broken by fear, was now restored by choice, and the watchful stars above became not just guides, but eternal witnesses to their pledge. The grove where her journey began no longer felt forbidden, but deeply welcoming. Ancient trees now cradled constellations in their leaves, and the very air hummed with a soft, shared consciousness. It was here that Elara found her deepest peace and her most profound revelations. The spirits of the forest no longer whispered vague warnings, but spoke with the clarity of old friends, their voices intertwined with the light of distant suns. They showed her visions that stretched the boundaries of her understanding, worlds of floating mountains, where rivers ran upward into the sky, and oceans of liquid light, where thought itself took physical form. These were not mere dreams, but glimpses of other realms bound by the same celestial threads that connected her own people to the stars. The elves' hard-won harmony, it seemed, was not an end, but a single, beautiful note in an infinite symphony. The stars had chosen the Eldar not for a final purpose, but to join a greater conversation, one that spanned the immeasurable distances between galaxies. Each shared vision was an invitation, a hint that their stewardship of this one world was merely the first step in a cosmic journey. The story of their tribe was a vital thread, but the tapestry it was woven into was vast beyond comprehension, filled with other civilizations, other struggles, and other wonders waiting to be discovered. The pact was secure, but the adventure had only just begun. From the summit of the Starfall Spire, Elara watched the dawn illuminate a world reborn. Rivers of light now traced the ancient forests, and distant villages shimmered with the soft glow of renewed star shrines. A profound peace settled in her heart, not as an ending, but as a quiet space between breaths. This harmony was not a prize to be won and stored away, but a living, breathing state that required constant care. The stars had returned as allies, but an ally requires a listening ear and a ready heart. She knew the balance they had fought so hard to achieve would always need guardians, those willing to hear the subtle shifts in the celestial song and act before silence could gather its strength again. Her own path was a testament to this truth. She had not been born a leader, but a listener. Her destiny was not written in unchangeable stone, but forged step by step through every choice to trust the light over her fear, to choose compassion over suspicion, and to believe in a fractured fellowship over solitary certainty. The dance between a calling whispered by the stars and the free will to answer it, that is where true magic lives. The future stretched before her people, bright with a promise that was not a guarantee, but an invitation. It was a canvas awaiting the brushstrokes of countless choices, a story just beginning its most wondrous